Hey everyone, welcome to BEARTH Podcast. I'm Ash. This month is Domestic Violence Awareness Month, and I couldn't have these conversations without including our Native sisters. So I reached out to Angel Charley. She is the director for the Coalition to Stop Violence Against Native Women. It's based in New Mexico. And their organization is trying to emphasize the point that the survivors of domestic violence in Native communities aren't just fighting an uphill battle within their own relationships, but on a collective level, on a systemic level. So we talk about the collective trauma and the need for communal healing. Listen in.
Hi everyone, Goatsi Hopa. My name is Angel Charley. I come from the Pueblo of Laguna, which is one of the 23 nations in New Mexico, one of the 19 Pueblo nations in our region. You know, I come to the work as a child in a home that experienced domestic violence, as a former survivor of intimate partner violence, and as a mother and an auntie who seeks to ensure that these cycles are broken for our little ones and future generations. You know, I came to the organization we're coming into 6 years now.
Wow.
6 years ago, really, I started off as a volunteer and trying to get involved with this organization that was doing such great work, and, you know, have been fortunate enough to serve as the executive director now.
I think that's really amazing. Can you tell me a little bit about the work your organization specifically does in order to help cater to survivors of domestic violence in the Native communities?
So we're one of 19 tribal coalitions across the United States. There's 19 of us that were created and funded under the Violence Against Women authorization of 2015, where we saw these expanded tribal provisions to really address these disproportionate rates of violence in Indigenous communities. It's more than 4 in 5 women who will experience this in her lifetime. More than half of that will be sexual violence. And so organizations like ours and the other 18 throughout the country were created to address this issue at the intersection of policy, of community support, training and education, and technical assistance. So there's quite a few of us doing it. It looks a little different in every single region. Our organization in particular was founded in 1996. So we're going into our 25th year as an organization working on this issue. So we were around before the Violence Against Women initiative happened. It really started with some of our coalition aunties who were tired of seeing this and wanted to make change and have swift action. So it really looks different, Ash, in every single community that we serve.
What do you feel is maybe the biggest concern? Is it something like safe places for them to go when they finally are able to get out? Is it maybe not having the funding they need to start over? Is it, you know, what are 2 or 3 of the biggest concerns that you see, you know, coming out? We know that kind of in a sort of a general population, many women will go back to an abuser 6 or 7 times before they feel like they're safe enough to finally leave a perpetrator. What do you feel are some of the maybe bigger issues that come up?
Sure. So we know that the statistics that we face don't just exist. It didn't just happen, that there were a lot of things that landed us where we are right now. One of which is a historic lack of funding to tribal communities to be able to address this issue. There's still a complexity of how tribes access money to address this issue. And then when we're talking about complexity, there's jurisdiction. So tribal women have to navigate a maze of jurisdiction a lot of times when they're leaving their situation or attempting to leave their situation. Even just getting a protection order a lot of times becomes very complicated. And then the last, which is this big piece, is just hundreds of years of systemic oppression. We're pushing back and working on healing from policies that were meant to eradicate our communities.
which leads me actually to, I think, an important question. And that is, especially if, say, the Native woman's perpetrator is her husband or boyfriend who happens to be a Native man. Can you expand on the idea of linking the fact that obviously his perpetration is not condoned, but at the same time, his own shame comes from hundreds of years of imperialistic torture and colonization and perpetration against him? Can you kind of expand on the link? Again, it doesn't mean that what he does for Native women is okay, but to kind of look at some of the roots of that perpetration, looking at the roots of that shame that most perpetrators experience in their expression of their violence. Can you kind of help discuss that link? Because I feel like this is really an important aspect when that's on top of the localized domestic violence. There's a wider conversation.
Sure, and I think we really saw this during COVID. We saw an increase in domestic violence kind of across the board. We knew that folks were calling more often and trying to get services and resources. But we also saw what the families were really struggling with during that time, which was access to healthcare. So we're talking about, like, if a family really needs services, we're talking about counseling or even just basic medical care. Our tribal communities are heavily reliant on the Indian Health Service, which is a governmental system that doesn't always meet the needs of community. So we're thinking about like medical needs not being met. There was huge food insecurity during the pandemic. In our communities, in particular the Navajo Nation, which is one of the tribes that we serve in partnership with 2 other tribal coalitions, there's only 6 grocery stores on the entire reservation, which is the size of West Virginia. We're talking about food deserts. And the ability for folks to access food. We're also talking about communities who might not have access to clean and running water. That, all of these are systemic barriers to health and living well. And so our families, are struggling against all of these different forms of oppression. But you said, of course, it doesn't excuse the behavior. We do need to address this, intervene. But what our organization does is really trying to address this at those root causes of the big system oppressions and gender-based violence.
Because essentially, I mean, the white majority government system within the U.S. keeps the reservations and keeps the nations from being able to access a lot of what frankly belongs to you. But at the end of the day, this then contributes then to the internal problems that you're facing, is what I'm hearing you say.
Yeah, I would agree with that.
Okay. When the Native women are able to find maybe a way out or find some sort of safety in their spaces, what are some things that may be contributing to the survivorship and healing process for them? Are you guys, are there ceremonies that you guys have either carried on or created, that they're able to move through? Is there support systems, things like that?
Sure. So Ash, in New Mexico, we only have 2 domestic violence shelters that are up and running now that are Native specific, which means that survivors are reliant on non-tribal services. So some of the things that we've advocated for in those non-tribal service provider spaces is, thinking about what types of medicines she needs to bring in with her. And we're not talking about like a pill that you take, right? We're talking about ceremonial medicines that you might bring in with you. We also know that in these shelters and spaces that accessing ceremony is important, but a lot of times those are multi-day ceremonies. And so, but that goes against a lot of the rules in domestic violence shelters. Like you have to be back and check in every single night. And those rules are there they serve a purpose, and we understand that. But we've advocated that if a woman needs to go home to have a ceremony done, that there are exceptions to those limitations that happen. And then we also open up a lot of space for community to come in and join us. We do a lot of narrative work. So we ask folks just to share pieces of their story with us. And part of that is letting go and acknowledging and beginning a healing process for themselves. So we have a 5K run, it's virtual, but everyone who's registered shares a piece of who they're running for, why they're running during Domestic Violence Awareness Month. And some of the stories that come through are completely beautiful. I'm running for myself because I'm a survivor. I'm running for my children so that they might never have to experience this issue. I'm running for my mom who experienced violence and left that relationship. And then, yeah, I think the last part is doing a lot of focus group style conversations with community. So bringing folks together to talk about this as a system issue. So our organization does not provide direct service, meaning that we don't work with survivors directly. We work with the folks who work with them. And so it's talking about this issue on a system level. So last week is a great example of something that we did on a system level, which is 6 of us from our staff went to Washington, D.C. to march in the People versus Fossil Fuels action that was happening. And it was to make this connection for folks that when there are extractive industries present in our communities, which there are, and there are high rates of extractive or fossil fuel industries in our tribal communities, there's an increased rate of violence, more often than not sexual violence. And tribal communities, are vulnerable, but also are highly vulnerable in that we're not able to prosecute non-Native offenders. And so I know we talked a little bit about what an intimate partner relationship might look like if both folks are tribal. One of the big issues that we work on is if the offender is not from tribal community, the person who isn't from tribal community, it then falls into that jurisdictional maze, and it's up to the federal entities to prosecute that. And a lot of times they don't. There's a huge declination rate, or the rate of which the cases are declined once it reaches the federal level. So bringing awareness to here's all of the big ways this issue happens and occurs in our community is a big part of what we do.
Even though you guys work with the organizations that work directly with survivors and you guys kind of assist with a lot of the advocacy work and so forth, I'm sure still you've probably interacted with a lot of survivors over the years and over time. Being yourself one, there's probably a lot that you've just experienced because it's so intimate for you. What do you feel, maybe what breaks your heart the most and what gives your heart the most hope?
Well, everyone on I should start off by saying everyone on our staff identifies as a survivor in some form. So we're really a survivor-led organization. I think what breaks my heart the most is that it is so prevalent, that there are so many of us who've experienced this issue. We say this, and it is true. For us, it's not a matter of if this happens, it's a matter of when this happens. How do we prepare ourselves? How do we, ensure that we're on a healing journey? How do we support the people who experience this? Because it's a when issue. And I think what heals my heart every day is knowing that we can transcend this, and that the work we're doing right now in all of the ways that it's supported by community means that we're ready and willing to have the conversations that are going to move us closer toward transcending survivorhood and really being in like a healing space for ourselves.
What do you need from those outside the reservations from white communities? What do you need?
That's a big that's a big question. I think it's for folks to have an awareness that the people closest to the issue are the ones who are able to solve the issue. We say the solutions to violence exist in our own communities, and so supporting organizations that are doing the work, ensuring and advocating that they have resources to solve this issue, because the solutions will look different every single community that we're in. I think it's also advocating that Indigenous people are in spaces where these conversations are happening, so that if you are at a table where someone is talking about domestic violence or intimate partner violence, sexual violence, that there's a representative from your regional tribal coalition, because there are 19 of us. And I think just learning more about the communities for whose land that you're on is also a good way to kind of familiarize yourself with those tribal people, those Indigenous people, and what their struggles might be, because it all intersects with gender-based violence at the end of the day.
I hear you. On a jurisdiction level, what is maybe a particular way, maybe in the more immediate response, or that that say for maybe the state of New Mexico or the region, maybe the Southwest region, can how can we change the court systems so that we are listening?
I'm one of our biggest supporters, and who we are a big supporter of, is Delegate Amber Karate, and they are a council delegate from the Navajo Nation. But I've heard them say several times in public meetings to policymakers, to the federal entity partners, DWI isn't a jurisdictional issue. This doesn't have to be a jurisdictional issue. There are ways to solve this. And it really comes down to it being a priority for us to be able to move beyond those barriers. Because they're barriers that we can all solve and work around. If DWI can transcend jurisdiction, so can gender-based violence, domestic violence, and accountability.
Is there anything that you want to add in the space that you feel is just really vital and important?
We're a member-driven organization, which means we work on behalf of our community and our members, and that if folks are interested, you can become a member. You can log on to receive our newsletters or our publications. And then, the easiest way to support us is to follow us on social media, to uplift some of the work that we're doing.
Okay, very cool. Well, I'm so appreciative of the space that you've provided here today, and sharing all of this with me. I'm just really grateful to you.
Yeah, thank you for making it happen, and for opening up this conversation, for us to bring this awareness, and for folks to think about this issue, and ways to get involved and